The silent alarm. The Mercy, a human hospital ship, cruised through the vast emptiness of space, its mission simple but noble: to deliver life-saving medical aid to the colony scattered across distant planets. Its sleek hull gleamed under the light of distant stars, as if untouched by the chaos of the galaxy. Inside, the crew moved in harmony, tending to their duties. Nurses checked on patients, doctors prepared medical supplies, and the ship's captain, Commander Ilara, reviewed the latest reports from Earth. It was just another peaceful day in the cold void of space. However, this peace would not last. Far beyond the Mercy, far beyond even the star systems it served, something was stirring. Something dark. A warning signal began to pulse faintly on the ship's radar, barely noticeable at first. A single blip appeared, then flickered away like a lost star. Commander Ilara, sitting in her command chair, glanced up. She had seen these blips before, but they were always false alarms. Space was vast, and space was dangerous. There were always unknown signals. It was nothing, she thought. But the signal returned, this time stronger. Ilara's hand hovered over the console, hesitation in her eyes. "Is it a ship or just some space debris?" she asked her officer. "I'm not sure, Captain," Lieutenant Rayner replied, squinting at the screen. "It looks like a ship, but it's not identified in any of our databases. It's coming in fast." Ilara's instincts kicked in. Her fingers tapped the console rapidly, trying to get a clearer read. A ship wasn't unusual, but the speed of this one was alarming. It didn't fit any known pattern of civilian or trade routes. The radar blip grew stronger. Then, just as quickly, it disappeared. For a moment, the crew held their breath, waiting for the all-clear. But then came the sound. A dull, deep rumble. It vibrated through the floor, reverberated in their bones. Every person on the Mercy felt it. The lights flickered, and a momentary panic gripped the crew. Ilara shot out of her chair, eyes wide. "It's here," she whispered, barely audible, as she rushed to the command station. The bridge was a flurry of activity. Red lights flashed as alarms began to wail. The Mercy's defense systems kicked on, sending energy shields around the ship. But it was too late. The enemy was already here. They hadn't arrived like any of the ships Ilara had seen before. There were no warnings, no signals from the approaching ships. They were just there. On the view screen, enormous shadows appeared, looming like dark giants, filling up the entire screen. A fleet, but not just any fleet. It was massive, far larger than anything Ilara had seen in the human records. Thousands of ships, each one bristling with weaponry, descended toward them from the darkness. The ships were sleek, sharp, and deadly-looking. "Activate shields," Ilara ordered, her voice steady, but inside she could feel a cold knot forming in her stomach. They were not prepared for this. They couldn't be. The crew scrambled, following their captain's commands. But despite their training, the realization set in. They were alone. This wasn't a random encounter or a misunderstanding. They were being attacked, and there was no way out. The first volley of fire came fast, and with brutal force. Explosions rocked the hospital ship as it was hit again and again. The shields flickered, barely holding against the onslaught. Ilara could hear the sound of the metal groaning as the ship was torn apart. "Captain, we've lost our starboard shields," Rayner shouted, his voice cracking as the ship shuddered under another blast. "We're taking critical damage." Ilara gritted her teeth. They were moving too fast, and the attack was too strong. The Mercy was not a warship. It wasn't built for this. It was built for healing, for saving lives, not for fighting. "Send out a distress signal. Get us back up," Ilara barked. But as Rayner punched in the coordinates, the screen flashed red. No signal. "The communications are jammed," Rayner said, panic creeping into his voice. Ilara clenched her fists, trying to think clearly. She couldn't afford to panic. Not now. But the sound of the ship being torn apart around them. The groaning, the cries from below deck, made it hard to stay calm. In the distance, she could see the enemy ships beginning to circle, like sharks closing in on a helpless prey. "Get us out of here," she ordered, slamming her fist on the console. "Full speed ahead. We're not going down without a fight." The Mercy lurched forward, its engines sputtering in a desperate attempt to move, but the damage was too severe. The ship's movements were sluggish and uncoordinated. They couldn't outrun these attackers, not with the damage already done. Ilara's heart pounded as she watched helplessly. The dark shapes of the enemy ships surrounded them, cutting off any escape. Another explosion rocked the ship. This time, it felt different. The sound was deeper, more final. The entire bridge shuddered as if the ship was about to break in two. Alarms screamed. Ilara turned to Rena. "How bad is it?" "It's over, Captain," Rena whispered, his face pale. "The engines are gone. We're dead in the water." Ilara's heart dropped. There was nothing they could do. They had been ambushed by a force they couldn't defeat, by enemies they hadn't even known existed. On the view screen, one of the enemy ships powered up its weapons. Ilara closed her eyes. She knew what was coming. They were moments away from destruction. The final attack. Look, as the last moments of the Mercy ticked away, Ilara's mind raced. How could this be happening? Who were these attackers? And why had they targeted a hospital ship, of all things? The next blast was inevitable. But what would happen next? Would humanity respond to this brutal act? Would they finally unleash their fury on the stars? The Mercy was a symbol of hope, a shining beacon that represented the compassion and goodwill of humanity. Its mission was simple: to heal, to help, to save lives. It was never designed for combat. It was a hospital ship, a vessel built to bring peace in a galaxy often filled with war and chaos. But as the dark shadows of the enemy fleet closed in, the concept of peace seemed distant, even impossible. Inside the command center, Ilara's heart hammered in her chest. She had always believed in humanity's peaceful nature, its ability to bring harmony where there was none. But now, facing the destruction of everything they stood for, something deep inside her shifted. Anger replaced fear. Rage. The kind of rage that burned hotter than any fire. The Mercy had been crippled, but it was not the ship that mattered now. It was the lives lost in this attack, the countless innocent people who would suffer from the consequences of this cold, calculated strike. The enemy had crossed a line, and Commander Ilara knew that humanity would not forgive them for it. The enemy ship circled, closing in like a pack of wolves on a wounded animal. Their weapons glowed with malicious intent, charging for the final strike. But before they could fire, the crew of the Mercy witnessed something they would never forget. In the distance, another ship appeared. A human warship, massive and terrifying. It was not just one ship, but a whole fleet, arriving with frightening speed. "Who are they?" Lieutenant Rena gasped, staring at the approaching vessels. "That's not the fleet from Earth." Ilara's eyes narrowed. She recognized the design of the ships. Even though they weren't from Earth's usual military forces, these ships were larger, more heavily armed. They had a distinct, almost frightening presence, and as the enemy fleet turned to face this new threat, a shiver ran down her spine. She knew what was coming. Humanity was about to make its statement. The first blast was a roar that shook the very stars. It wasn't just a shot, it was an announcement. The first warship in the fleet fired its weapons, and the enemy ship closest to the Mercy erupted in flames. The blast was so powerful that it lit up the dark expanse of space like a fiery sun. The enemy ship didn't stand a chance. Ilara watched in awe, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just the strength of the weapons that struck her. It was the sheer anger behind the attack. Humanity wasn't just defending itself. It was exacting revenge. And it was doing so with ruthless precision. They're here for us," Rena muttered, his voice trembling. Ilara could feel the same anger burning inside her. Humanity had been pushed too far. The attack on the Mercy was not just a strike against a hospital ship. It was an attack on everything humanity stood for. It was a slap in the face to everything they had fought for. And now, Earth's war fleet had arrived, ready to make the attackers pay. One by one, the enemy ships started to fall. The human fleet's weapons tore through the darkness, cutting through enemy shields like butter. The bright flash of explosions filled the screen, each one a death sentence for the attackers. But the enemy did not retreat. They fought back fiercely, their weapons targeting the human ships with deadly accuracy. "Captain, the enemy ships are closing in on us," Reyna shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Ilara's gaze never left the screen. Despite the devastation around them, she felt something different. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even desperation. It was determination. Humanity had been attacked, and now it would show the galaxy just how much it was capable of. She looked at the enemy ships one last time. They had made their mistake. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for violence when pushed to the edge. The very thing they thought would crush Earth, war, was now being turned back on them with full force. The human fleet was more than just a response. It was a declaration. "Get us out of here, Reyna," Ilara said, her voice steady. "We need to be in the heart of this fight." Reyna hesitated, looking at the screens filled with the chaos of battle. "Captain, are we ready for this?" Ilara's eyes burned with a cold fire. "We don't have a choice." The Mercy, although crippled, was still functional enough to move. Slowly, it turned to join the fray, moving toward the conflict as the human fleet tore through the ranks of the attackers. The enemy ships were no match for the sheer might of humanity's response. The Mercy pushed forward, dodging enemy fire as it made its way to the center of the battle. The enemy was scattering. Some ships tried to flee, others attempted to regroup, but they were no longer in control. Humanity had turned the tide. But Ilara knew this was only the beginning. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for justice. The galaxy would remember this day. The stars would burn bright with the memory of humanity's wrath. As the Mercy fired its weapons, blasting enemy ships from the skies, Ilara's thoughts raced. The enemy might have crossed the line, but humanity was showing them the true meaning of power. And once this battle was won, they would make sure no one ever made the mistake of underestimating Earth again. The stars above Earth had always been silent. They had watched as civilizations rose and fell, as empires conquered and were defeated. The vastness of space held secrets that no one could have possibly understood, but it had never been the setting for a battle like this. The Mercy was no longer just a hospital ship. It had become a symbol of humanity's wrath, and the galaxy would remember it forever. The human fleet had turned the tide. The enemy ships, once confident in their superiority, now struggled to stay intact. Every blast from the human warships made the void of space light up with an explosion that echoed through the cosmos. The enemy didn't know how to respond. Their weapons were powerful, but they were no match for the ferocity of humanity. Commander Ilara stood at the helm of the Mercy, her hands gripping the controls. The ship's systems were still failing, but it didn't matter. She could feel the surge of power from the human fleet behind her. They were fighting for their future, fighting for their people. And they weren't going to stop until every last attacker was gone. "We're getting their attention," Lieutenant Reyna called out from his station. "But they're regrouping." Ilara's eyes flicked to the display screen. The remaining enemy ships had formed a new battle formation, trying to gain an advantage. They seemed to think they could win with sheer numbers. But humanity had learned long ago that numbers alone meant nothing against determination. "Stay focused," Ilara said, her voice calm but full of intensity. "We've come too far to back down now." The battle raged on, each shot from the human fleet cutting down an enemy ship. But it wasn't just the firepower that made the difference, it was the strategy. The humans were using their knowledge of the enemy's weaknesses, exploiting every opening. The attackers had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to think on their feet, and now they were paying the price. As the battle continued, Ilara's mind raced. She thought of the lives lost on the Mercy, of the innocent people who had been caught in the crossfire. She remembered the screams of the wounded, the faces of the families who had begged for help, only to be met with violence. It was a stark reminder that war was not just fought in the stars. It was fought in the hearts of every person who lived through it. The Mercy fired once again, targeting a large enemy cruiser. The explosion lit up the screen with a blinding flash. The ship was gone in an instant, reduced to nothing but debris floating in the vacuum of space. The remaining enemies watched in horror as the human warships closed in on them, relentless and unyielding. "They're running," Rena reported. His voice held disbelief. "The remaining ships are trying to flee. They're too damaged to fight back." Ilara's eyes narrowed. She had seen the signs. Enemies were no longer so confident. They had come to destroy. But humanity was showing them the true meaning of destruction. The galaxy would now know that Earth was a force to be reckoned with. "We finish this," Ilara ordered. The Mercy moved forward, cutting through the space like a blade through flesh. The human fleet followed, surrounding the enemy ships from every side. There was no escape, no mercy. One by one, the remaining enemy vessels fell. Some tried to make a run for it, but the human fleet was relentless. Ilara had never seen such precision, such unity in a battle. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to send a message. The last of the enemy ships tried to make a break for the outer rim of the system. They were desperate now, knowing that no matter how fast they ran, they couldn't escape the wrath of humanity. But it didn't matter. The human fleet closed in, and with one final coordinated strike, the last ship was destroyed. The battle was over. Ilara stood silently for a moment, her gaze fixed on the wreckage of the enemy ships. The silence was deafening, but it was a silence of victory. Humanity had shown the galaxy what happened when it was pushed too far. The stars themselves seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the aftermath of the bloodshed that had just unfolded. "Commander, we've won," Rena said quietly, almost in disbelief. Ilara didn't answer at first. She had been through too much to feel any kind of satisfaction. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. This was a statement. The enemy had crossed a line that humanity would not tolerate, and now they knew the price they had to pay. The fleet began to regroup, their ships moving closer to the Mercy. Ilara knew this was just the beginning. There would be more battles to fight, more enemies to face. But for now, the enemy had been wiped out, and the message had been sent loud and clear. Earth was no longer just a small planet in the corner of the galaxy. It was a power to be reckoned with. The universe would remember the wrath of humanity. Ilara took a deep breath. The galaxy had just learned one very important lesson: never underestimate humanity. The silence in the aftermath of battle was oppressive. The once vibrant space, filled with the light of thousands of stars, was now dotted with the scattered remnants of what used to be enemy ships. The destruction was complete. No ships, no life signs, nothing that could tell the story of the aggressors remained. Commander Ilara stood on the bridge of the Mercy, staring out at the wreckage of the battlefield. Her hands were clasped behind her back, her expression grim. Despite the victory, there was no joy. The cost had been too high. Too many lives had been lost, both on the Mercy and throughout the human fleet. The faces of those who had died haunted her thoughts, reminding her of the price of war. "We've done it, Commander," Lieutenant Rena said, his voice laced with disbelief. "We've stopped them. The fleet's been wiped out." Ilara's eyes remained fixed on the debris, the eerie quiet of space filling the room. The enemy ships that had once threatened Earth were now nothing but floating husks, their once proud hulls shattered and torn apart. She had led the charge, but the real victory wasn't just in the destruction of the enemy. It was in proving that humanity would not tolerate such aggression. But even as she processed the battle's end, a heavy realization weighed down on her. The Mercy wasn't just a hospital ship anymore. It had become a symbol of humanity's vengeance, and she had led that vengeance. How would the galaxy see them now? Would they view humanity as the protectors they always hoped to be, or as a force driven by wrath? "We've stopped their advance," Ilara finally said, turning to face the crew. But we can't ignore the bigger picture. The galaxy will have to reckon with what we've done. There's no going back now. Her words hung in the air, a reminder of the significance of the moment. They had proven themselves capable of defending Earth. But now, the question remained, what comes next? The calm of space was slowly broken by a signal coming from one of the other human warships in the fleet. It was a simple message, but the gravity of it was not lost on anyone. Commander Ilara, the voice crackled over the comms. We've picked up a new transmission. It's coming from deep space, distress signals from an unknown vessel. Ilara's brow furrowed. A distress signal. Are you certain? Positive. It's not one of ours, Commander. And the signal is strange, like nothing we've encountered before. A new threat. Ilara didn't want to believe it. The battle with the enemy fleet had taken everything out of them. But she knew that space was full of unknowns. Just because they had vanquished one enemy didn't mean there wouldn't be another. Send it to the bridge. Let's hear it, Ilara ordered. A low hum filled the room as the transmission was sent. The crew watched the screens carefully, the faint glow of distant stars lighting up their faces. And then, the signal came through, a burst of static, followed by words that sent a chill down their spines. Help. Anyone out there? This is, from the edge of, we need, support, attacking. The voice was garbled, broken. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. The distress signal was barely coherent, but there was no mistaking it. Someone, somewhere, was in need of help. And it wasn't an enemy ship. Ilara's instincts kicked in. She knew that in times like this, humanity didn't hesitate. If there was someone in need, they would answer the call, no matter the cost. Patch it through to the fleet, Ilara ordered. We're going after them. The moment the words left her mouth, the crew began to mobilize. The fleet had already proven its worth, but now it was time to show the galaxy the other side of humanity. Its compassion, its willingness to protect and save, even after such a hard-fought battle. We're leaving now, Lieutenant Rena asked, his voice tinged with surprise. But we've just won, Commander. We've lost so many ships. Are we really going to chase down an unknown signal? Ilara turned to face him, her eyes steely. We've never been the kind of people to turn our backs on someone in need. If we can help, we will. The crew didn't hesitate. Orders were issued, and the Mercy began its course, setting a new trajectory through the stars. Their warships followed suit, their engines igniting as they prepared to venture into deep space once again. The unknown transmission had created a new sense of urgency, but it wasn't just a matter of survival now. It was a matter of something greater. Humanity had shown its strength, its power, but now it had to show its heart. This mission would prove that Earth wasn't just a force for destruction. It was a force for good, ready to protect those in need. As the fleet moved toward the unknown transmission, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The crew was tired, battered from the previous battle, but there was no turning back now. They had won, yes, but their story wasn't over. The galaxy had seen their wrath. Now it would see their compassion. And in that moment, Ilara understood something that had eluded her until now. The attack on the Mercy, the tragedy, the wrath. It had all been part of the journey that would define humanity in the galaxy. They were not just fighters. They were protectors. As the fleet moved toward the signal, Ilara's eyes stayed fixed on the stars. One thing was certain. The galaxy had only just begun to understand what humanity was capable of. The darkness of deep space was overwhelming, but the humans on the Mercy had learned to find their way through it. Commander Ilara stood before the massive viewing window, staring out into the vast unknown. The stars seemed to swirl in their distant orbits, silent witnesses to humanity's journey. The fleet was on its way to the source of the distress signal, but there was a nagging feeling in her gut that something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the thought that their journey had just begun, and the challenges ahead would test their resolve in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The fleet's ships moved in tight formation, their engines propelling them further into the dark void. The signal had been faint at first, just a whisper in the stars. But now, it was growing stronger, more urgent. It wasn't far away anymore. The thought of reaching the source was enough to push Ilara forward, but still, doubt clung to her. The unknown was a terrifying thing, and yet it was a thing humanity had always faced head-on. "Commander," Lieutenant Reyna's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're getting closer. The signal's getting stronger. It's definitely coming from that sector." "The coordinates match." Ilara nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The ship's systems beeped with new data as they drew closer to the signal. The familiar hum of the engines reverberated through the hull, but the tension on the bridge was thick, suffocating. The crew had already experienced the violence of war. Now they were preparing to face something entirely different. They weren't sure what they would find. "Ilara," Reyna said again, quieter this time. "Are we sure about this? We've already lost so many. What if this is some sort of trap?" Ilara turned to him, meeting his gaze. She had heard his concerns, but she wasn't going to let fear take hold. They had faced enemies head-on. They had fought back against overwhelming odds. Humanity didn't back down. "If there's a chance someone needs help, we're going. We're not leaving anyone behind." Reyna hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Understood, Commander." As the Mercy moved deeper into the dark expanse of space, the fleet followed. The feeling of uncertainty intensified, and it wasn't just Ilara who felt it. The crew, every soldier and medical officer aboard, knew that what they had done was extraordinary. They had fought back an invading force, but now, what they were about to face could change everything. The distress signal was close now. A sharp beep echoed through the control room, signaling the proximity of the source. The crew stood at attention, their eyes glued to the screens, waiting for the moment the source would appear. Approaching the source, the navigation officer called. "We're entering the coordinates now." Ilara leaned over the console, watching intently. A digital map of the surrounding area came to life on the screen, showing a patch of deep space, a seemingly empty space in the void. But something was there, something invisible until now. The distress signal was emanating from a derelict vessel, a ship floating in space, abandoned and adrift. Its once mighty hull had been battered, covered in scorch marks and dents. It was clear that it had been attacked, and its fate was sealed. The ship had been left to drift for some time. But the real question was, who, or what, had left it there? "Helm, bring us alongside," Ilara ordered. "We need to board that ship and find out who's still alive." The crew moved quickly, preparing for the operation ahead. The Mercy slowed to a crawl, carefully approaching the damaged ship. The tension in the air was thick, but Ilara kept her focus. They had to get answers. There was no room for error. The moment the two ships were close enough, the boarding party was ready. Ilara stood at the head of her team, her eyes fixed on the dark, hulking wreck in front of them. The outer hull of the ship was a mess of torn metal and exposed wires. It looked like it had been through hell. And it had. But the distress signal had to come from somewhere. Someone had to be alive. The boarding team suited up in their exosuits, the weight of their weapons making the silence all the more deafening. The airlocks hissed as the teams prepared to breach the ship. The entire crew knew that entering this wreckage could mean danger, but they had no choice. They had to find out what had happened, and whether anyone was still in need of rescue. "On my mark," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the churning in her chest. 3, 2, 1. The airlock doors opened with a hiss, and the crew stepped into the eerie, dimly lit interior of the vessel. The floors were slick with debris, and the faint hum of the ship's power systems was the only sound that could be heard. Ilara led the charge, her boots clicking on the cold floor as she moved cautiously through the narrow corridors. "Check the crew quarters first," she ordered. "See if there's anyone alive." The medical team and security followed her closely, scanning for any signs of life. But as they moved deeper into the ship, It became clear that no one was left. There was no one in the crew quarters. No signs of struggle, no signs of life. It was as if the ship had been abandoned long before they had arrived. "What happened here?" Rena murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Ilara didn't answer. Her gut told her something wasn't right. The ship had been abandoned, but the distress signal had still been active. Someone had left it on. The question remained, who had done this and why? They reached the central control room of the ship. The flickering lights cast strange shadows on the walls as Ilara stepped inside. The console was active, and to her surprise, a single figure sat slumped over it, unconscious but alive. "Over here," Ilara ordered. "Get them to the medical bay. Now." The medical team rushed over, carefully lifting the injured figure and rushing them back to the Mercy. The ship's identity remained a mystery, but this was the first person they'd found. The question was still open. What had happened to the ship? What had attacked it? And could they be facing a new threat? As the figure was brought aboard the Mercy, Ilara's mind raced. The mission was far from over. They had saved one life. But what about the rest? The galaxy was still full of mysteries, and humanity was about to find itself at the center of a new, terrifying chapter. The crew of the Mercy had been on edge since they discovered the survivor on the derelict ship. The injured figure, now stabilized and resting in the medical bay, hadn't spoken a word. The only sound that filled the air was the quiet hum of the ship's systems, keeping them all in a state of uneasy anticipation. No one knew what they were about to uncover, but they knew it was something much bigger than they had anticipated. Commander Ilara stood by the medical bay, watching as the medical team worked to revive the survivor. She knew they needed answers, but the silence from the survivor was deafening. It was as if something had broken them, not physically, but mentally. "How are they?" Ilara asked, her voice steady, though there was a hint of worry in it. Dr. Darnell, the chief medical officer, looked up, his brow furrowed with concern. "We've stabilized them, Commander. Physically, they should make a full recovery. But they're in shock. They've been through something horrific." Ilara nodded grimly, knowing it was more than just a bad experience. There was something deeply troubling about the survivor's condition. The look in their eyes, the blank, hollow stare, spoke volumes of the trauma they had endured. "I need to talk to them," Ilara said. "As soon as they're able to respond." Dr. Darnell didn't protest. He knew that answers were desperately needed. "Understood. I'll keep you informed." Meanwhile, the rest of the crew was busy examining the derelict ship. Rena and Lieutenant Jarek were at the console, scanning every available system and piece of data they could access. There was something strange about the ship's data logs. They seemed deliberately wiped, but not in the way the crew of the Mercy would have done. The logs were too incomplete, too distorted, to be easily erased. Whoever had left the ship had made sure that no one could learn its true story. "This doesn't make any sense," Jarek muttered as he typed in another series of commands. "It looks like they were trying to send a distress signal, but it's almost as if they knew someone would intercept it. But why?" "I don't know," Rena replied. "But I'm not liking the sound of this. The signal came from here, and it looks like someone went to great lengths to make sure we found it." Ilara joined them at the console, her face grim. "What are you seeing?" Jarek's fingers flew over the keyboard. "I found traces of a secret transmission. It's been encrypted, but not well enough. It's an old code, but it's definitely from someone who knew how to keep things hidden. This isn't just some stray distress signal. Someone wanted us to find this ship." Ilara's mind raced. Who would want that? Who would deliberately send us into danger? The ship's internal systems had been deeply damaged, but somehow they managed to isolate fragments of an old transmission. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reveal a chilling message. "The enemy is coming. Prepare for war." The word sent a chill down Ilara's spine. "The enemy is coming," she repeated. "What enemy?" Rena shook his head, clearly as confused as she was. "We've been fighting wars for centuries, but we've never encountered anything like this." Just then, the soft chime from the medical bay interrupted their conversation. Dr. Darnell's voice echoed over the intercom. "Commander, the survivor is conscious." Ilara didn't hesitate. She quickly made her way to the medical bay, her thoughts racing. What would they learn from the survivor? What did they know about this mysterious ship, its destruction, and the cryptic message? The survivor, a woman in her 30s, was sitting up on the medical bed. Her face was gaunt, pale from the trauma, and her eyes were bloodshot. Despite the signs of distress, she held herself together with a quiet resolve. But it was clear that she wasn't just physically damaged. Something deep inside her had been shattered. Ilara approached her slowly, taking the seat next to her bed. "We're here to help," Ilara said gently. "Can you tell us what happened?" The woman's eyes flickered, and she blinked several times as if trying to focus. It took her a moment before she could speak, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "The fleet. They came for us. We were unprepared. We couldn't stop them." Ilara leaned in closer, her heart pounding. "Who came for you? What fleet?" The woman's gaze seemed to drift, her mind seemingly lost in the horrors she'd endured. "The Avaris. They're not like anything you've ever seen. They attack without warning, without mercy. We tried to send the signal, but we weren't fast enough. They destroyed everything." The name Avaris sent a ripple of fear through Ilara's mind. She'd heard rumors, whispers among other fleets about a race of beings known only for their brutality, but no one had ever confirmed their existence. And now, she was hearing it from a survivor who had clearly lived through their wrath. "Why did you send the distress signal?" Ilara asked, her voice firm. "Why did you want us to find you?" The survivor looked at her, her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. "You're the only ones who can stop them. Earth has the weapons, the power. You're the last hope." A shiver ran down Ilara's spine. She had suspected that there was more to this than a simple rescue mission. But now, it was clear. This wasn't just about saving lives. This was about humanity's survival. "We didn't know," she whispered. "We didn't know what was out there." The survivor's eyes closed for a moment, and she breathed in deeply. "Now you do. And it's only a matter of time before they come for you too." Ilara stood, a wave of determination flooding through her. The crew had already faced great odds, but nothing could prepare them for the horrors the Avaris could unleash. The fate of humanity was now tied to the unknown enemy that lurked in the far reaches of space. "Get ready," she ordered, her voice steady. "We have a war to fight." The message from the survivor was clear. The Avaris were coming, and humanity was the last line of defense. Ilara could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on her, the fate of countless lives, now hanging on the decisions they would make in the coming days. The Mercy was no longer just a hospital ship. It was a warship, carrying the hopes of a civilization on its fragile shoulders. "We can't waste any more time," Ilara said to her crew, her voice steady, but filled with a new sense of urgency. "We need to prepare for the worst. I want every fleet on high alert. Every ship capable of fighting must be mobilized. The Avaris won't give us a chance to recover. They'll strike before we're ready." Her orders were clear, and the crew immediately began their preparations. Dr. Darnell worked tirelessly to stabilize the survivors and prepare them for what lay ahead. Reyna and Jarek dived into their systems, searching for any remaining intel that could give them an edge. And Ilara. She sat in the command chair, her eyes focused on the vast stars beyond, trying to calm the storm within her mind. The Mercy began to make its way back to Earth, but there was no comfort in the thought of home. Earth was a long way from safe. The attack on the hospital ship, the survivors' warnings, and the silence that had followed all seemed to paint a picture of a galaxy spiraling toward destruction. The Avaris weren't just an unknown enemy. They were a threat that could obliterate humanity in a single, swift strike. As the Mercy neared Earth's orbit, Ilara stared out at the vast emptiness. She could see the remnants of the fleet, still intact, but disorganized. The planet-side military was not yet prepared for a full-scale invasion. And the higher-ups on Earth, they didn't yet know the full extent of what they were up against. "Commander, we've just received a priority transmission from Earth." Reyna's voice cut through the silence. Ilara turned toward him, her brow furrowing. "What do they want?" Reyna hesitated for a moment. "It's the Council. They want to know why we haven't responded to their orders. They want the Mercy to return to base immediately." Ilara's lips tightened into a thin line. "I don't care about their orders. We have a war to fight." She turned back to the view of Earth, the lights of the distant cities twinkling like stars below. The Avaris were coming, and humanity's only chance was to unite and fight back with everything they had. "We're not going back to Earth until we're ready," Ilara continued, her voice full of conviction. "Prepare all weapon systems. I don't know how much time we have, but we will make sure that Earth is prepared." The crew worked in a flurry of activity, each of them pushing past their exhaustion and fear, focusing on the task at hand. The Mercy transformed before Ilara's eyes. What had once been a ship of peace, filled with medical supplies and care, was now a fully operational warship. The medical bay was now empty, save for a few critical patients. The rest of the crew had become soldiers, preparing for a battle that could decide the fate of the galaxy. Dr. Darnell approached Ilara, his face grim. "We've finished stabilizing the survivors, Commander. They're ready to be briefed on the situation." Ilara nodded, grateful for his efforts, but her mind was elsewhere. She could feel the weight of leadership, the responsibility for each life aboard the ship, and the knowledge that humanity's future rested in her hands. The survivor had given them hope, but it was clear, hope alone would not win this war. "We'll need all the help we can get," Ilara said, her voice low and resolute. "We'll send out a call to all the other fleets. Humanity has to come together if we're going to stand a chance against the Avaris." Reyna worked quickly, sending out messages across every communication channel. Earth's fleets, scattered across various colonies and outposts, needed to be brought together, and fast. There was no time to waste. The Avaris would strike soon, and when they did, Earth would need every ship, every soldier, and every weapon at their disposal. As the fleet gathered, Ilara stared out at the stars again. She had seen peace in her life, seen the medical ships bring healing and comfort to those in need. But now those same stars had become a battlefield, and the sound of war was already in the air. The countdown to humanity's greatest battle had begun, a calm before the storm. The next few days were spent preparing for war. The Mercy, now fully armed, joined forces with other human ships from across the galaxy. They were a mixed fleet, some fresh from the colonies, others older ships hastily refitted for combat. But despite the disparity in age and technology, they were united in one cause: survival. Ilara stood on the bridge, looking over the fleet that now surrounded them. The communication channels buzzed with activity as ships made their final preparations. She could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew what was coming, and no one could predict how it would end. The survivor from the derelict ship had been debriefed, and her story confirmed their worst fears. The Avaris weren't just conquerors. They were predators, cold, merciless, and relentless, and now they were coming for Earth. But humanity had something that the Avaris didn't count on: unity. The war fleet, while diverse, was driven by a single, unbreakable will to protect their home. The Avaris had made a fatal mistake by attacking one of humanity's own. They had awakened a wrath that no one could have anticipated. "We're ready, Commander." Reyna's voice broke through her thoughts. Ilara turned toward him, nodding. "It's time." The fleet of humanity, outnumbered and outmatched, was ready to face an enemy that could destroy them all. But Ilara knew one thing above all: humanity would never go down without a fight. They would make the Avaris regret ever crossing their path. With a single order, the fleet moved out, the darkness of space stretching ahead of them like an endless canvas. The war for humanity's survival had begun. and there was no turning back.